Hello and welcome to the Fedora Files. I am Gregory Fedora, and I'm so glad you're here. Now, I've gotten different emails, people asking me to go into some different subjects. Yeah, I did a recent podcast on UFOs, and someone asked me about cryptozoology. Why do I love it? If you go to my YouTube channel, it's the youtube.com at the Fedora Files, and there you can see I do weekly or daily almost. It's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. A happy little monster video. And I talk about these different creatures people claim to have seen and interacted with. And I tell you briefly about it. And so you can go check there and see those. But I just love cryptozoology. One of the things I love about it is the stories, the folklore, everything that goes with it. And so I've been a fan of that. And I just love the story. I love it. I love everything about it. I love the people who have interacted with things or seen things. They're adamant about these things they have seen. And, who am I to judge that? But they saw or dealt with something that they can't explain. And that's what cryptozoologists do. So to really get into it, let's the definition of cryptozoology is this. It's the study and search of animals, and especially legendary animals, usually in order to evaluate the possibility of their existence. So a cryptozoologist basically goes in, someone says, hey, we think there's a Bigfoot here. Okay, they go to the area, they look at could this area sustain a creature the size of Bigfoot? Is it also possible that a creature the size of Bigfoot could live in this area and be undetected for this amount of time? And so they evaluate these things. And so, like, if you live in New York City and you say you saw a Bigfoot in Central Park, there's like zero chance that has happened because it's not big enough to sustain it, and there's no way that thing can hide in Central Park. I've been to Central Park. It is big, not big enough. But so that's what they do. Now, the phrase cryptozoology and cryptozoologists did not come about until 1955, and it was coined by a man named Bernard Heuvelman. So Bernard Heuvelman and his buddy Ivan T. Anderson wrote a book called On the Track of Unknown Animals. And both these guys were zoologists. So they had the degrees, they were legit zoologists, but they were fascinated with these stories that people had of these creatures that people had not seen. Now, the thing is, some of these creatures ended up being found. And people were like, what? That's real? One instance, and I've talked about this before, I believe, but the panda bear. The panda bear was almost a mythical creature in China. We're not seen very often. And when people from the West came, they heard about this creature and they're like, oh, that's not real. There's no way that exists. They had no idea where it was. Then some monks brought a pelt, and they looked at the pelt, and that was in the late 1800s. And they were like, wow, this is real. It looks furry. Maybe it was dyed. They didn't know. They still had not seen the actual animal. And it wasn't till the early 1900s that a zoologist found an actual panda bear. And then he took it with him. And now we know, like, the reason they're so scarce, like if you've ever watched the panda at the zoo giving birth, it's very difficult for them to mate and reproduce. It's trying. Even in the best of conditions, they have maybe one a year, maybe. Like, and will the baby survive? We don't know. I mean, it's difficult. So imagine in the wild how much more difficult it is when there's predators around, there's things out there to kill the young baby. So yeah, they were scarce back then. So there you go. You also had the coelacanth, that fish that they found that they believe had been extinct for millions of years. Now it's there. The giant squid is another one where they believed that's fake. There's no way. And now we know that does exist. So these studies, these people who have searched for these, they find these things, and it's pretty amazing that these creatures are out there. Now, though the term cryptozoology didn't come about till 1955, The actual idea of studying unknown creatures has been around for millennia. Um, it can be traced back to roughly the 15th century BC in Egypt. There was a Egyptian pharaoh, a pharaohess. Her name was Queen Hatshepsut, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. And at that time, the Red Sea wasn't really charted well. The area wasn't really well known, but she was trying to trade with other countries. And as she was doing these trades with these countries, they were getting these creatures that they had no idea what they were. So she had set up some people to study these animals to find out what they are. So they were studying unknown creatures, finding these unknown creatures, one of which they found a long-necked dragon. Turns out it was a giraffe, but they didn't know. It was in their minds, it was this dragon thing. They'd never seen this. This is crazy. And if you see a giraffe, it is crazy. Like if you'd never seen one and walked upon it, boom, what the heck? That's insane. But so they had giraffes. They found these different kinds of parrots they had never seen. One of the things they called it a unicorn. It's the African unicorn. So if you read old stories of unicorns, people are like, "Oh, don't exist." Well, we now know that what they were calling this thing a unicorn, it was an okapi, and it's a real animal. It's in Africa, and so they had no idea. They also would find bones of dinosaurs, and at that time, dinosaurs was not a term that anyone knew or talked about. No one knew what a dinosaur was. No one had ever seen one. They had no clue. So a dinosaur, what is that? We have no idea what a dinosaur is. But what it was is like to them it was a dragon. These things were dragons. The stories of dragons come from dinosaur bones. So when people say, "Oh, there's no such thing," no, there are. We just changed the name to dinosaur. But so in Egypt, they were studying these things. Again, later in it went on and on. There was Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman author and a naturalist, a philosopher, and he wrote the Natural History in AD 77. From when he did his journeys to the Far East and into India, Pliny told the people about seeing giant grasshoppers, leopards, tsetse flies, uh, fire breathing basilisks, and numerous insects that were at the time unknown to Rome. So these things were crazy. They didn't know. Uh, Another naturalist was a Swiss man named Conrad Gesner, and he was actually the founder of modern zoology. And he wrote the 5-volume book that is considered the beginning of modern zoology. And not only was it the first bibliography of natural writing histories, but it also became the first to describe all the known animals of the time period. Now, the 5 volumes are over 450 pages and consist of a few cryptids. There's drawings of prehistoric fossils in it. There's drawings of unicorns, of hellcats, sea monsters, sky serpents, dragons, and mermaids, and the kraken are all in these books, and they're accurately drawn pictures of these creatures. Now, he also has accurately drawn pictures of just plain old cats and dogs and lions and animals that we know were legit real that people had seen, but he had these other creatures and they were just as accurately drawn as if he had studied them. So we don't know what Conrad said these were, where he got these. But it's fascinating to know that though we may not know what these things are or where they are, that there was something going on, and that he found things that that we just don't know about. Now, as I said, I've always been fascinated by cryptozoology. I am drawn to it because I'm a storyteller. I like the stories. I like the history. I like um, hearing the people's encounters. I have never encountered any creatures that I know of. Maybe I have, and I just don't know it. Like I go into the woods, I go camping, I go hiking, I do all those things. I hear things. Maybe I'm hearing a Bigfoot. I don't know. I've never seen one, and I don't pretend to be able to tell you what these things were. And but I am fascinated by it. Again, the mythology, the legends, the stories, the things people have claimed to seen and interacted with, to me are just mind-boggling and so very cool. And I love it. Now, that doesn't mean that I believe every single story I hear. Like like when I hear about I do these stories. I did one on Iowa dragons, and again, it was the story of the Iowa dragons. People believe that, and some people claim to still have seen these things in Iowa. Do I think there are dragons in Iowa? No, I don't. I don't think there's a possibility of that for a number of reasons. There's just no place for these things to live and hide. I mean, Iowa, though it is got a lot of farm and it's vast, just the chances of a dragon of the size people have claimed, I don't think it's possible. I think they're misidentifying something. Maybe it's a large bird, like a condor or something that got off course, and they're seeing it and they don't know because that's not from the area. But they are seeing something, and I want to hear their story. I want to hear it, and I love the myth. I love the folklore of it. But I would say that cryptozoology draws me in, and I'm so very into it, and I'm so very into everything I can learn. Because one thing I found is when you find these stories about these different creatures and things that have occurred, you learn something about the environment that these people lived in. You learn something about who who they were and what they feared and what they were dealing with. And who am I to say that they didn't deal with something? I mean, Marco Polo, who we consider one of the greatest explorers of his day, in his journals, he wrote about dragons in China. What was he seeing? The description of these things that he wrote, what was it? Like, he claims to have seen these creatures pulling chariots. The Chinese emperor at the time that he went there had a man being paid to be the royal dragon tamer. What was that? Why would you pay someone to tame something that didn't exist? What was he taming? What was he taking care of? What was it? I mean, obviously, the Egyptians thought that a giraffe was some kind of dragon. Was it like just some animal that we do know about, but at the time they considered it a dragon that we don't know about? And so it's those kind of stories that always draw me back. Again, like Conrad, the father of modern day zoology, his drawings, his books, like when you see the drawings and the stuff he wrote about, you're like, wow. And he's still considered one of the greatest zoologists of his day and any day, because they still look at his drawings and they're very accurate and spot on. They're not like, his drawings are very similar to Leonardo da Vinci's of the human body. It's almost as if he dissected these things and looked into them. And so when you find his stuff, you're just like blown away. And I'm just one of these. I'm open to hear these stories. I'm open to learn more about them because it just makes life more interesting. It's like a little bit of salt on your steak. Steak is great, but just add a little bit of salt. It makes it even better. And that's how I feel about cryptozoology and these monsters, these creatures. The world is fascinating. It is amazing. It's so cool. And then you sparkle in these myths and these stories, and you're like, wow, it's even cooler than I thought. So that's why I'm into cryptozoology, and that's where I go with it. Now, next week, I'm starting a new series. I'm very excited about it. I am going to be going into reading and analyzing Madeline. I can't remember her name right now, but she wrote the book called The South Mountain Magic. And I have a copy of it. I'm going to be reading it and going over her stories of South Mountain, which is in Maryland, which is where the snallygaster lived, which I've talked about, which is where the dwayyo hunts, which I've talked about, which is where the snarly owl is. and where the Wizard of South Mountain was, and Madeline Dahlgren, and she has a church she built up on South Mountain. But I'm going to be going over that book for the next few weeks and going into it and looking at chapter by chapter and just giving you an analysis of what I've read and what I think about it. So thank you for stopping by, and just remember, like, keep searching, looking into stories, looking into folklore, looking into what we consider fiction. And until next time, stay safe and keep searching.
Check out FedoraCRT.com today.